In the opening scene, Frieren, the Downer, is seen reading a grimoire while riding back to the royal capital with her 3 friends, Himmel, Hyder, and Eisen, after finally taking down the Demon King they've been hunting for a decade. As they spot the capital's walls coming into view, Himmel and the others call out to Frieren to check out the beautiful walls and talk about what's next, since they're all retiring now. Frieren, who feels like no time has passed, brushes off the walls and just chats with her buddies, who are pretty nervous about what life has in store. By the end of their talk, they're all laughing and joking like real friends do. Before long, they reach the royal capital and get the hero treatment from the whole city. Soon after, they meet the king, who thanks them personally for defeating the Demon King and bringing peace to their kingdom. Afterward, the heroes kick back until night to join the festival thrown in their honor. Once it gets dark, Himmel and Eisen take their time indulging in the city's treats, while Hyder, who was a priest back then, drinks way too much. Himmel spots Frieren sulking and tells her to lighten up and be happy since the king is setting up statues of them in the plaza. Frieren ignores him and keeps waiting for the party to wrap up. About an hour later, the heroes all gather to watch the sky and say their final goodbyes. After reminiscing about some embarrassing and amazing moments from the past 10 years, including some dumb moves Frieren made during their adventures, everyone except Frieren bursts into laughter. When the noise dies down, Himmel thanks everyone for making the last 10 years a blast. Frieren, being a buzzkill, chimes in that it was just 10 years, so it's not a big deal. Knowing how spoiled and rude Frieren can be, Himmel brushes her off and turns with his friends to witness the Era meteor shower, which is a once-in-a-lifetime event that happens only every 50 years. As they soak in the spectacular sight, Frieren kills the vibe again by saying the view from the city kinda sucks. To help him out, she promises to take him to a better spot in 50 years to catch a clearer view of the meteors if he's still kicking by then. Himmel nods along and continues watching. The next morning, Frieren heads out from the royal capital to keep exploring the edges of the continent for spells and other stuff. Even though Himmel and the other two still don't get how she sees time, they wish her well. Days turn into weeks, months, and years as Frieren continues her journey. Over the years, she gathers so much knowledge and experience that she finally decides it's time to chill for a bit. After 50 years of wandering and collecting spells, she takes a break. One day, Frieren pops into a local antiques and magic shop to buy a shadow dragon's horn. Sadly, they don't have it in stock. She suddenly remembers one they snagged from the Demon King's castle way back and realizes she had Himmel hang on to it. With the meteor shower coming in a few weeks, Frieren recalls her promise to Himmel and decides it's time to keep it. After being on the road for nearly a month, Frieren finally rolls into the city. As she wanders through the streets, she notices all the changes that have been made. After searching high and low for Himmel, she finally spots him. Unfortunately, the Himmel she finds looks nothing like she expected. After 50 years away from the city, he's really aged and looks pretty frail. Without wasting time, Frieren asks about the horn she came for, and Himmel casually mentions it's been sitting in his cabinet all along. She scolds him for hiding something so dangerous, but Himmel just shrugs it off. He grabs the horn and hands it to Frieren, who doesn't seem too impressed. Once she's got the horn, Frieren sends it back to her place using her magic bird, and takes some time to check out the statues they made of them back in the day. After soaking in the sights, she goes back in and convinces Himmel to pack up so they can catch the legendary meteor shower one last time. They hit the road and run into Eisen the dwarf and Hyder, now a full-blown bishop, waiting by the city gates. After a warm welcome, Frieren leads them on a week-long trek to the spot she promised to take them all 50 years ago. Along the way, they relive their glory days with all sorts of adventures. When they finally get there, they lie back on the soft grass and watch the meteor shower together. Himmel thanks Frieren for keeping her promise and helping him enjoy life with his friends one last time before he passes away. And a few months later, Himmel finally succumbs to old age. At his funeral, Frieren stands with Eisen and Hyder, watching the procession. As the townspeople pay their respects to the hero, they notice how blank Frieren's expression is and call her a fake. When it's time to lay the good guy to rest, Frieren finally breaks down, realizing how foolish she's been for not really getting to know Himmel before he died. An hour after the burial, Hyder jumps into a carriage to head back to the holy city. Before he leaves, he says goodbye to Frieren, as if he knows it's the last time he'll see her, and tells her to bring him a drink at his grave whenever she visits. Frieren asks if he's scared of death, and the priest says he's not worried since they'll all be together in heaven. Shortly after he leaves, Frieren turns to the dwarf and tries to recruit him as her bodyguard, but Eisen is getting old too, and tells her he's not available for that job anymore. Frieren feels a bit sad, but eventually gives Eisen a smile for being such a good friend. Once everything is wrapped up, she sets off for her next adventure. 20 years later, Frieren checks out the outskirts of the holy city to catch up with Hyder. After getting lost in the woods for what feels like the 100th time, she finally stumbles upon a little girl with purple hair. The girl seems friendly and asks what Frieren's doing in the forest. Frieren mentions she's looking for a man named Hyder, and the purple-haired girl leads her to Hyder's cabin. There, Frieren finds her old buddy, now sporting a mane of gray hair, and they joke around for a bit before settling down for some tea. When things get serious, Hyder introduces the girl as Fern, a war orphan he took in a while ago. When he asks why she's visiting, Frieren says it's to repay her debts to him before he passes away. Hyder scoffs at that and asks her for a favor. When Frieren agrees, he asks her to take Fern on as an apprentice, since she's she's pretty talented with magic. Frieren flat out declines because she worries Fern might get stronger only to die later. Not backing down, Hyder asks for another favor, this time taking her to his library and showing her an encrypted grimoire from Ewig the Sage. He wants her to help translate it because it supposedly has forgotten spells for immortality and bringing people back to life, and rolls her eyes at how cheesy it is. When she finally gets her head around it, she asks Hyder why he wants the grimoire studied if he's not afraid of dying. Hyder admits he was just putting on a brave face and, actually, he is scared of death. Frieren gives him a hard time and tells him to give her 5 or 6 years to decode the whole thing. While she's at it, Hyder asks her to teach Fern some magic too. So, Frieren heads back into the woods and spots Fern at the edge of a cliff, focused on a big boulder across the mountain. Frieren notices how well the little girl manages her mana and sees a ton of potential in her. Fern shows off her skills by firing a magic beam at the rock, but it misses. A bit puzzled, she asks Frieren what she needs to do to get stronger. Frieren kicks things off by asking if Fern really loves magic. When Fern says yes, Frieren smiles and starts her magic lessons. For her first lesson, Frieren sits by the riverside with Fern and breaks down magic control and mana strength. She tells Fern that she has a long way to go before she can increase the mana in her body. When Frieren sees the despair on Fern's face, she reassures her that her magic control is impressive for her age, and Fern acknowledges the compliment and keeps moving forward. Over the next few years, Frieren works on decoding the Ewig grimoire while teaching Fern to level up her magic. Fern practices day and night, hoping to build up enough strength and mana reserves to finally complete her mission. One day, Hyder, now old and wobbly, finds Frieren in the library working on the grimoire. He asks about Fern's progress. Frieren tells him that while Fern is putting in the effort, she still has a long way to go before she becomes a real mage. As they chat, Hyder collapses and wakes up hours later in bed. Unfazed, Frieren plans to work faster on the grimoire so she can help him her way. First, she seeks out Fern to tell her to pause her training and spend time with Hyder during his final moments. When Frieren reaches the usual cliff, she finds Fern working hard to hit a rock and tells her to stop so she can be there for her master. But Fern gets upset and shares how she met Hyder. She had just lost her entire village and family, being the only survivor. Hyder found her when she was about to jump off a cliff to end her life. Thankfully, his words saved her. Now that she has a chance to repay him, Fern wants to honor Hyder's name before he passes, whether by becoming a mage or learning another skill. After hearing her out, Frieren lets her do what she wants and continues deciphering the grimoire over the next few weeks. Fern keeps practicing until she feels ready to try again. Then one day, Frieren finally finishes translating the whole grimoire. Turns out, there's no immortality or resurrection spell, and Hyder kind of knew that already. Instead of freaking out, he keeps his cool and hopes for a quick death. Hours before he passes away, Hyder asks Frieren how Fern is doing. Frieren tells him that Fern is doing pretty well, and Hyder urges her to take Fern as her new apprentice now that she's strong enough to fight by her side. At this point, Frieren feels obligated since it's her old friend's dying wish. Before she leaves, Hyder asks Frieren to grab her payment from a drawer in the house and to leave before night falls because he fears he might die that day. Frieren tells Hyder to give Fern a proper goodbye, so she doesn't feel abandoned. Hyder is impressed by her kindness and calls her a sweet girl. Frieren asks Hyder why he saved Fern in the first place. He thinks it over for a bit and finally says it's because that's what Himmel would have done. So, Frieren heads over to the cliff and sees that Fern has already wrapped up her task. Soon after, she pays a visit to Hyder's grave and pours out 2 bottles of booze in his honor. After witnessing the funeral rites, she leaves with her new apprentice, Fern. In the next scene, Fern and her master, Frieren, lend a hand to an old farmer to harvest pumpkins using magic and snag a scroll with folk magic tips for warming tea. Fern notices the odd way they're getting paid and asks Frieren why she doesn't just take cash. Frieren explains it's her passion. She feels it keeps her grounded. When they swing by town next, they bump into a herbalist who takes them into the woods to show them the sorry state of the hero Himmel's statue. The woman remembers Himmel fondly since he saved her when she was young and a demon was wreaking havoc on their village. She feels bad about Himmel having his image wrecked. Frieren chimes in that he kind of deserved it because he made sculpting a pain. The woman gets a bit weirded out by Frieren's comment, but lets the elven mage clean up the statue. After they finish cleaning, she looks at the dull grass around the statue and wishes it was a bit more colorful. Since Frieren has spells that can grow flowers, she decides to jazz up the area with some pretty blooms. She picks blue moon weed flowers, a type she hasn't seen before. Fern asks why she'd choose those, and Frieren explains it's because they grow in Himmel's town. To create the flowers, Frieren needs to check out a picture to have a mental reference. After seeing what it looks like, Frieren decides they need to go hunting for them so she can replicate the flowers. She calls for Fern to get ready, but then Fern is caught hiding some seed rats from her. After a little chat, they let the rats go in the forest and talk about how to find and analyze the blue moon flowers so they can cast spells to recreate them. Fern is all in, so they hit the road and chase down every lead they have to find the blue moon weed flowers. After exploring a bunch of options in nearby villages for 6 months and coming up empty, they decide to shake things up. This time, they head back to the herbalist to discuss a few more things. The herbalist is stoked about how long they've been searching, but Frieren thinks it didn't take that long at all. When the herbalist asks Fern about their progress, she just says no and complains about Frierin's crazy obsession with magic. The herbalist chuckles, pulls out a small pouch, and hands it to Fern while encouraging her to share her grievances with Frierin. In the next scene, Fern opens up to the smiling herbalist, showing her the small pouch of medicinal flowers the herbalist wanted them to plant instead. While they're chatting, a seed rat nabs their pouch of seeds and bolts into the woods. Frierin and Fern carefully follow the seed rat, putting their chat on hold until they finally find its stash. Along the way, Frierin asks Fern about her weird obsession again, and Fern admits it's because she loves magic. After reminiscing, Frierin and Fern figure out where the seed rats hide their treasure over time. When they reach the tower's base, they find petals from a familiar blue flower. Frierin then levitates to the top of the tower and finally spots a wild patch of blue moon weed flowers. Remembering Himmel's words about how beautiful the flowers were, she can't help but feel thrilled to see them. Fern shows up, firing off more silly questions to figure out why Frierin loves magic so much. Eventually, Frierin gives her some scenarios until she gets it. A few days later, they return to the statue and plant the weed flowers around it, with the herbalist tagging along. After some more light talk, Frierin places a flower crown on Himmel's head and wishes her buddy a peaceful and well-deserved afterlife. A couple of months later, Frierin and her apprentice set off to another town to look for spells. When they get there, Fern chats with her master about splitting bills and picking up the essentials they need to get by. As they list the must-haves, Fern suddenly remembers all the junk her master has blown their hard-earned cash on in the past, with the only worthwhile buy being a book on magical history and stuff. They hit an intersection where Frierin heads off to grab her stuff while Fern, worried about her wasting money again, tails her around town until they end up at an accessory shop, looking a bit lost. Fern ducks behind a fountain and catches a weird expression on her master's face. Right then, a stray cat rolls up to say hi. After some cat petting, Fern looks back up and sees her master paying for whatever's in the small box she's holding. Still staying hidden, Fern follows her master into the rougher part of town and watches her asking a local about a shop that sells good sweets and desserts. To her surprise, Fern follows Frierin to the tavern the guy pointed out, and isn't too shocked to see some smokers and wild characters checking out her master's lovely figure. Frierin casually asks those guys for dessert spots, and they surprisingly turn out to be nicer than they look. After giving her the scoop on a popular dessert place, the dudes walk her out. Fern keeps trailing her master until she remembers she still has shopping to do. Later that evening, Fern gets to the inn and finds Frierin already there. She says sorry for being late and settles in quickly. Not long after, Frierin invites her out on a dessert date, and Fern agrees, though a bit reluctantly. Once they hit the outdoor dessert shop, they take in the stunning view, and Frierin tells Fern to pick whatever she wants since she's been saving up for this. Fern mentions Frierin's fave dessert, Merker pudding, which sparks a memory of when they were kids hanging out with the guys. Back then, Frierin was kinda bummed she didn't know about their favorite foods, so they filled her in. Moving on, Frierin pulls out that box from earlier and hands it to Fern, who suddenly remembers it's her birthday. Fern opens the box to find a gorgeous hair ornament and thanks Frierin in her own way for the gift and for trying to get to know her better. The next day, both Frierin and Fern wake up, ready to hit the road for their next adventure. While they're walking, Fern asks her master what to expect this time, and Frierin says she wants to relive the adventures she had with Himmel and the others, so none of it fades away. Hearing that, Fern grins it's the first time Frierin said something that made sense to her. She teases her master for a bit before going quiet and focusing on their journey. When they find an old piece of land, Frierin decides to teach Fern some defensive magic. After checking out her combat skills, Frierin ups the challenge and pulls off a 360 attack on her. Though Fern totally eats dirt in training, she still picks up some valuable lessons from her master. After a long day of training, the duo continued on their journey. As they traveled to their next stop, they chatted about defensive magic and the best ways to use it. While Fern was talking about magic, Frierin realized she hadn't read up on magical history. She teased her student for being slow with her studies. Fern took the jab in stride and kept moving alongside her master. Eventually, they reached the next village, where Frierin ran into someone she recognized, who led her to the spot where the Elder Sage of Corruption, Qual, was sealed. Just to give you some backstory, Qual is a demon who caused chaos in the area 80 years ago before being sealed away by the hero Himmel and his crew. Frierin knew the seal would have weakened over the years, so she was there to finally take care of the demon for good. As they made their way, the old guy told Frierin that Himmel used to visit the village every year until he stopped coming about 30 years ago just to check on how the seal was doing. Every time he dropped by, he'd call Frierin a bad person for not visiting him at all. Thankfully, Frierin hadn't forgotten about the seal, and now she was ready to keep her promise and destroy the monster once and for all. When they finally got to the seal, Frierin could feel it was definitely unstable, so she decided to chill for the night and come back the next day to take on Qual. That evening, Fern asked her master why she chose to seal Qual instead of just destroying him back then. Frierin explained it was because he was way too strong for them to handle. Even as a demon, Qual was feared by humans as one powerful magician. The hundreds of spells he created back in the day are still in use today, and they really owe him for that. After throwing out some wild numbers to show how strong the demon really was, Fern got worried and asked her master if she could really fight such an enemy. Frierin just stood up and asked if she had really read the magic book. At this point, Fern gulped and admitted she hadn't. To save energy on small talk, Frieren lay down to sleep and prepare for the big day. The next day, Frieren and Fern approached the demon seal, armed and ready for battle. When it was time, Frieren broke the seal and brought the demon back to life. In those first moments, Qual reminisced about the good old days with Frieren and asked about the Demon King. When he found out Frieren had taken out his king, Qual got angry and decided he was going to seek revenge. He reached out and cast the only destructive spell he knew, Zoltrak. But to his shock, Fern's defense successfully blocked the attack. While he wondered how Fern could block his strongest spell, Frieren explained that humans had studied his magic for decades and developed new spells to counter it. Now, Zoltrak was just a regular offensive spell that posed no threat to any mage anymore. Realizing this, Qual figured that the defense spell must use up a ton of magic energy. All he needed to do was amp up his attacks and wear them out. On his next strike, Frieren told Fern to remember her practice and to guard her while she did something on the side. For the next few minutes, Qual focused all his attacks on Fern, who blocked every single one of them. What he didn't notice was that Frieren was already preparing a little surprise for him. By the time he caught on, it was too late. She unleashed a powerful attack spell and used it to take him down. Qual was immediately sent back to being a demon of the past, and Frieren returned to the village to share the news. There, she spotted a weird hat and recognized the old guy as the brat who had flipped her skirt up years ago. Time flies, she chuckled, smiling at the funny way humans live their lives. After collecting their reward, she and Fern set off to the next town, chatting like old pals and soaking in the sights along the way. About a year later, Frieren and Fern swung by the Graz Channel in the Central Lands to do some work and gather folk magic before hitting the road again. After a few days of exploring the area, they finally got to chat with an old man who took them to the beach, which was all polluted, and asked for their help to clean it up. In return, he offered them a fake book that he claimed was written by Flam the legendary mage. Frieren checked out the book and asked the guy if that was the only grimoire in their village. When he said yes, she decided to lend a hand and help him clean the beach anyway. Fern was curious why she took the job, and Frieren said it was because she wanted to do it for herself. With that, they got to work. A few months later, during the chilly winter, Fern was seen heading out one morning to grab some food at the nearby store. When she came back to their inn room, she was totally grossed out by how messy it was. Turns out, she had cleaned it up the day before, but somehow Frieren had managed to wreck the place again before crashing for the night. Annoyed by Frieren's laziness, Fern snatched the book from Frieren's face and forced her to wake up. After getting her dressed, Fern pushed her master to the beach to keep working. After hitting a milestone, Fern asked Frieren if she'd always been this late and annoying. Frieren apologized for her tardiness and admitted she had never been a morning person. Once Fern heard that, she asked if Frieren had ever gotten in trouble because of it, and Frieren mentioned one time she had. They then kept packing the wood into a pile. When they wrapped it up, they burned it and cozied down for dinner that night. Their employer asked about their progress, and Frieren mentioned they were almost done. The man politely asked them to speed things up so they could finish before New Year's festival to catch the sunrise on day. Frieren just ignored him and kept eating. The next morning while working, Fern asked Frieren if she had ever seen a sunrise. Frieren replied that she never really cared for sunrises or whatever. To dodge more questions, Frieren hurried her work so they could finish up quickly. Over the following weeks, they pushed themselves to get as much done as possible to clear the debris before New Year. After several tiring hours tossing and burning debris, they finally wrapped up the job. Then, on New Year's Eve, they checked the water quality until they confirmed they were done. The man visited them that evening and made Frieren promise to be there for the sunrise the next day. On their way back to the inn, Fern asked how Frieren was going to wake up so early, and Frieren joked she'd just stay up all night and crash right after seeing the sunrise. That night, Frieren took a stroll down memory lane, remembering times she had with her friends when they were younger. Bright and early the next morning, Fern woke up to find Frieren still snoozing. Before the sun rose, she dragged her master to the popular viewing spot and made her stand by the railings to catch the sunrise. Thankfully, the sun painted a stunning yellowish-red glow across the sea and the town, but Frieren got bored pretty quickly and asked Fern to take her back home. However, Fern noticed that Frieren seemed to be enjoying herself a bit since she'd been grinning ear to ear since they arrived. Realizing Fern was right, Frieren decided to stick around a bit longer. Soon after, she remembered another time with her friends when they visited the graves of Isen's family. At the cemetery, Hyder, the priest, bent down to pray for the souls of the fallen, wishing them a safe journey to heaven. Back then, Isen didn't believe in heaven, so he challenged the idea of such a fictional place. Luckily, the priest managed to convince both Isen and Himmel to accept the comfort that comes with believing in heaven. Almost 30 years later, Frieren shows up at the same spot with her apprentice and spots an old, squirmy Isen praying for the same folks again. She grinds to a halt when she sees the dwarf and asks if they can hang out. Even though he's a bit miffed by her lack of manners, Isen still lets Frieren and her apprentice crash at his place. While sipping tea, Frieren asks Aizen what he needs so she can help him out. Aizen tells her he's been writing to Hyder over the years, so he knows Frieren asked for the same thing long before Hyder kicked the bucket. Frieren acts all surprised, and Aizen points out she didn't know this because she didn't bother to learn more about them at all. After some chit-chat, Aizen takes Frieren to Volbasin, a place she's been to ages ago. When they arrive, Frieren asks why he brought her there, and Aizen says it's to help him track down the real grimoire of the legendary mage Flam. Frieren shoots him a few questions, and soon it clicks that Hyder's been making steady headway in his search for the real deal. They wander into a large forest thick with plants, where the Viking dwarf tells them to look for a big tree. After tossing around a few silly comments, they finally get serious about finding the tree. This time, Frieren takes Fern's feelings into account and pushes Aizen to hurry up so Fern doesn't get too annoyed with her, which makes Aizen crack a smile. A few weeks into their search for the big tree, they finally start making some headway. As they chase down a lead, Frieren asks Aizen why he's so dead set on finding the grimoire, and Aizen says it's because he feels for her. When she asks him to explain, Aizen remembers how sad she was at Himmel's funeral, wishing she'd gotten to know him better. So, to help her connect with Himmel's spirit, he's planning to dig up notes from Flam to figure out how to chat with the dead, since Flam had written out the process. Frieren tells Aizen she doesn't care about seeing Himmel anymore, plus that kind of stuff is just fairy tales. Aizen chuckles and reminds her that all magic spells started out as fairy tales too, so there's nothing to stress about. He's already talked things over with Hyder, and they came up with this plan together. Right now, the best she can do is stick to the plan. When they reach the big tree, Frieren walks up and remembers when Flam planted it. That was 1,000 years ago, back when Frieren was still basically a teenager. On that day, Flam planted the tree to keep her house safe and hide her book of knowledge from nosy people. Before she took off, she told Frieren that someday she'd want to come back and grab the book. Now that she's here, Frieren uses her magic to lift the shield so she can get into the room behind the big tree. Fern is a bit surprised by how comfortable Frieren seems in this spot, but when Aizen tells her that Frieren was Flam's student, she keeps quiet. Checking the book, she finds a place Flam called Oriole, which is way up north on the continent. Flam said she talked to the souls of several dead buddies and wished Frieren could see it too. Fern gets curious about the place and asks her to find out where it is. Frieren looks it up and realizes it's in Ende, the same place where the Demon King's castle is. At first, Frieren is hesitant about going there, but Aizen convinces her to promise to visit so she can chat with Himmel. With everything set, Frieren and Aizen head out to the Demon King's castle. On the way, Frieren dozes off and starts mumbling about how cold the north is. Fern gets worried and asks Aizen what happened to make Frieren so anxious. Aizen explains that the northern part of the continent is still freezing cold, so they need to be ready. Fern stays quiet and keeps going until she gets annoyed with Frieren's laziness. Aizen eventually asks her what she thinks about Frieren as a master, and Fern shares all the odd stuff she's seen during her journey with Frieren. In the end, she calls Frieren a weirdo who doesn't seem to enjoy much. Hearing Fern's take on Frieren, Aizen remembers their first meteor shower together. Before Hyder interrupted the sad vibe, Himmel and Aizen were trying to convince Frieren to take on a student so she wouldn't get bored traveling. Eventually, Aizen figures Frieren must be a good master before they get back to his place to chill. After saying goodbye to the old dwarf, Aizen wishes Frieren luck on her long journey ahead. Frieren pauses to think about the last time she visited a place like this. Once she's done, she turns to Fern and says their journey will only take about 10 years. As master and apprentice set off on their journey, Fern takes a moment to remember the last time she had a long chat with Hyder before he passed away. Back then, Hyder was trying to trick Fern into behaving under Free's guidance, threatening to haunt her if she didn't. When Fern figured out his tricks, she hit back and made the old guy laugh. But as that nice memory starts to fade away, Fern wakes up, sleeping on Friren's shoulder. Once Frieren sees her apprentice is awake, she tells her to stay alert because they're about to arrive at their next destination, the Willy region in the Central Lands. Fern does what she needs to, and soon, they reach a town to relax a bit. A few minutes later, they stop at a store to grab supplies. There, the woman running the place warns them about creepy ghosts hanging around the mountain pass they need to cross after leaving town. Frieren gets curious and asks more about the ghosts, thinking they might just be some undead monsters. The woman suggests they talk to the locals for more info. Before heading back to the inn, Frieren chats with people around town to learn about the ghosts lurking in the mountain pass. From what they gather, those ghosts are actually the spirits of loved ones trying to reconnect with their living relatives. When they get to the inn, Frieren explains how the undead work, telling Fern that they're just corpses controlled by magic and all that. But this time, these ghosts don't look like typical undead. As they enter their room, Frieren seems a bit freaked out about how the monster might look, and tells Fern to forget about trying to figure it out. Before bed, Frieren makes plans for them to leave the village the next day, but Fern convinces her to stay and help out. The next morning, they head to the mountain pass to check out the ghost sightings. Once they reach the area where villagers are disappearing, Fern goes on high alert and warns her master about the illusions monsters use to trap people. Frieren recognizes a specific monster known for using such magic, and calls it by name Einsam. Now Einsam is a greedy and clever monster that feeds on humans. It does this by conjuring up phantoms that resemble the dead relatives of its victims to lure them into its lair to devour them. Luckily, the monster isn't a big problem for mages, since high mana spells can take them out. Frieren asks Fern if she can can really shoot down an apparition of someone like Hyder without feeling guilty afterward. Fern tells her not to worry about her, and they keep moving. Eventually, the atmosphere turns foggy and dark. Fern and her master arm themselves, ready to take on any phantoms that might show up. Just moments later, Hyder appears behind Fern, calling her name. Fern turns to see Hyder's apparition, but just as she's about to shoot it, Hyder speaks only sweet words from a cherished memory Fern has of him. She freezes up, caught in the moment. Frieren realizes what's happening and prepares to take Hyder out herself. Just as she's about to act, Himmel pops up as well. Not bothered by the creepy apparition, Frieren tells Himmel to say what he needs to say, and Himmel tells her to shoot him. So Frieren does just that without a second thought, which nudges Fern to do the same. Once they're done shooting, Fern breaks down a bit as she returns to reality. Frieren tells her to stay calm so she can face the real Hyder when they reach Oriole. With that, Fern gets back to herself and continues to follow her master. After a few more hours on the road, the duo finally made it to Regal Canyon, out in the Central Lands. They hide out of sight when they spot a red fire dragon snoozing in its nest. Frieren checks out the pile of junk the crazed dragon lifted from past adventurers, but then she spots a grimoire and gets super interested in snatching it. To do that though, they've got to deal with the dragon somehow. For their first attempt, Frieren has Fern hit the dragon with a basic offensive spell. When that doesn't work and the dragon wakes up, she ditches Fern, leaving her to face the dragon solo. It doesn't take long for Fern to realize how dangerous the dragon is, so she splits and meets up with her teacher in a safe spot. After thinking it over, they decide they're gonna need a buddy. That night, they head back to Eisen to chat. Eisen tells them to look for his former apprentice, Stark, who's now living in a village near the canyon. When Frieren asks Eisen if Stark's a good warrior, he doesn't say a word. The next day, they finally reach the village and quietly look for the guy. Somewhere along the way, Fern asks Frieren about the grimoire in the dragon's nest, and Frieren says it has a spell that lets you see through people's clothes. As they debate how useful that spell is, a granny shows up and tells them Stark is looking for them. On their way to Stark's place, the woman shares the hero story of Stark. Turns out, the dragon attacked the village 3 years ago and left after a standoff with Stark, who just appeared out of nowhere. After hearing such a brave tale, Frieren and Fern feel pretty good about this Stark guy. When they finally get to his training spot, they approach the fiery redhead, who tries to show off a scar he got from an earlier fight. Once he realizes who Frieren is, he gets serious and asks if his master sent them to bring him back. Frieren explains she needs his help to be their frontliner so they can take down the solar red dragon together. Before saying yes, Stark asks Frieren why she wants the grimoire so badly. Frieren admits it's because a friend of hers praised the spells she collected. After hearing her wild reasons, Stark agrees to help, but then asks if she can really beat the dragon. Frieren tells him that if he can keep the dragon busy for 30 seconds, she can cast a spell strong enough to take it down. Stark replies by asking why he has to do that. At this point, Frieren just asks if he's ever fought monsters. Stark drops the tough guy act and starts crying, begging Frieren to save his sorry life. He claims he got lucky 3 years ago because he was frozen until the dragon ran off. Not long after, the villagers decided to praise him and call him a hero. Fern is totally disgusted by his display of cowardice and asks Frieren to ditch this loser. But Frieren walks over to check out the crevice in the mountain behind Stark. After feeling it for a bit, she tells Stark to get his act together. Later that night, Frieren and Fern talk about Stark's heroism with the pub owners. When Fern gets cocky with her insults, Frieren reminds her how pathetic she was in her first monster fight. Fern shuts up and finishes her food. Soon afterward, Frieren heads to the inn and tells Fern to see if the doofus is okay before hitting the hay. As Fern heads out, Frieren remembers her run-in with Eisen a few weeks back and finally figures out that guy's origin story. Meanwhile, Fern arrives at Stark's training grounds only to find him digging into the mountain as he keeps training. She calls him out in disbelief and Stark stares back at her. When she finally comes to her senses, Fern asks Stark why he's training so hard if he's so set on not fighting the dragon. Stark goes on another ramble, telling her he's just putting on a show because the villagers believe his presence is keeping the dragon at bay. Fern asks him what his plan is if the dragon actually attacks the village. Stark admits that when that day comes, he'll have to defend the village, but he also hints that he might just bail. As for the scar on his forehead, he says it came from his master, not the dragon, when Eisen was let down by him. Fern takes his rough hand and tells him she believes he'll stick around if the dragon shows up. Stark gets a bit uncomfortable and wonders if Fern is trying to be cheesy. Fern explains that when she first encountered a monster, she had to handle it all on her own. At first, she ran away for her life, but eventually, she found the guts to face the monster and took it down quickly. She tells Stark that his determination to protect the village is real, and that kind of resolve could take down 10 fiery red dragons if it meant keeping the village safe. After she leaves, Stark thinks about what she said and strengthens his resolve. Fern heads back to the inn to tell her master about her chat with Stark. The next day, they head back to Stark's training spot and feel let down when they don't see him there. After attempting to get Fern to play tag with the dragon, Stark finally shows up to get things going. Before they face the dragon, Frieren asks Stark why he cares about the village so much. Stark replies that he's grown to love the people there over the past 3 years and would do anything to protect them. Once they reach the dragon's nest, Frieren spots Stark's trembling hands and chuckles a little. When Stark tries to make a fuss about it, Frieren tells him she's laughing because that's exactly how his master used to feel before facing a big enemy. With that, Stark steps up and stands in front of the dragon, unsure of what to do next. He knows he's got to keep the monster busy for 30 seconds, so he digs deep to confront his fears and fight the dragon. As he closes in on it, he realizes it's okay to be scared as long as he's got the will to face his fears. Before long, the battle kicks off, and Frieren starts to understand why Aizen smacked his student back in the day. It turns out Aizen wasn't disappointed or mad at Stark. He was actually terrified of the power Stark had, so much so that his instinct kicked in and he struck the kid. Aizen saw just how strong Stark could become and felt positive about his future. Now that Stark is deep in the fight, he does everything he can to defend against the dragon's attacks. When he gets the edge, he lands a huge blow that brings the dragon down. With 30 seconds gone, Stark yells over to Frieren, pushing her to attack the dragon. Frieren, who already knows the dragon is done for, doesn't move and only spills the beans to Stark after he throws enough insults her way. A few minutes later, the girls come down to thank Stark for dealing with the dragon. Shortly after, Frieren and her apprentice start checking out the giant pile of junk left by the dragon. Stark chats about what his master used to say about the elf going through the trash. Frieren remembers the night she wowed her travel buddies by making shaved ice with one of her magic tricks. Even though Aizen didn't get the significance of that little stunt, Himmel the hero was totally convinced otherwise. The next day, Stark says goodbye to the village and sets off with the girls after they grab their gifts for taking down the dragon. After walking a little while longer, they stop to use a spell from the grimoire. Eventually, they ask Stark what he plans to do next, and he says he's going to travel with them. After a few more days on the road, they finally roll into the fortress city of Wall. As soon as they get there, they meet this giant guardian at the checkpoint to the northern lands. He tells them they can't go past the gates because he thinks it's too dangerous for them. When he's called to the Castellan's house, the big guy stands up and warns Frieren and the kids to be careful and behave before heading out. Once he's gone, Frieren and the crew explore the town and just hang out there until they eventually get through the checkpoint, whenever that might be, which could take a few years. Stark and Fern share surprised looks at Frieren's laid-back attitude. When she goes off to do her thing, the duo splits up to check out the city. Stark heads straight to the nearest restaurant to dig into some yummy jumbo plates, but he can't stop whining and complaining about it. Soon after, Fern shows up to join him and grabs a glass of milk to sip on. Stark asks her why she looks so mad, and Fern starts by asking him if he's cool with chilling in the city for another 2 years just waiting for the checkpoint to open. When Stark says no way, she urges him to come with her so they can go find an easier way out of town. Once they get outside, Stark suggests flying over the big wall, but there's a barrier stopping that from happening too. In the next few scenes, they hit up villagers and locals for any hints. When they get nothing, Fern throws in the towel, but Stark is still game. He tells her they should ask the black market folks for some info on the checkpoint. Fern instantly agrees and starts talking to every shady character they can find in the slums. After spending ages asking for help, they still come up empty. Stark then decides to check out the guard station, having nothing to lose. Before they get there, Fern asks him why he's so keen to get past the checkpoint. Stark replies he doesn't have a ton of time. Fern asks why that is, and Stark says he needs to get back in time to share all his wild stories with his old, frail master, Aizen. He feels it's the only way to repay Aizen for taking care of him, and if he takes too long, Aizen might kick the bucket before he gets the chance to say thanks. Fern processes the thoughtfulness of Stark and they get back to searching. After wandering the streets for a bit longer, Fern finally spots Frieren trying to keep a low profile. Stark starts grilling her, thinking she's gotten into trouble again. This time, Frieren says she's just been shopping as usual, and they happen to start following her. Just then, the big guard from earlier shows up and apologizes to Frieren for being rude before. Not long after that, the Castellan comes in to pay his respects too. Turns out, the village really respects the elf, so they let her through the checkpoint without any hassle to access the northern lands. Next, all the villagers line up to witness Frieren's visit, and even though the special treatment isn't her favorite thing, Frieren has no choice but to go with it. As they leave the village for the northern lands, Frieren wishes she'd had more time to learn about the village's magic. On their way to their first town in the northern lands, Frieren starts daydreaming about her 10-year adventure with the heroes. Back in the day, she had just gotten a fake grimoire from the legendary mage Flam and was complaining about how wild people can get when they're trying to con others. After a few hours of dreaming, she wakes up to find her buddies, Fern and Stark, making breakfast for all of them. Fern is the first to notice her awake and is shocked that Frieren could get up this early. Before she goes back to sleep, Fern quickly gives her a massage and feeds her some breakfast, making sure Frieren's wide awake so they can keep moving towards the first settlement in the northern lands. When they reach Ing Road, which is in the northern lands, Frieren and her crew stop to help clear a landslide blocking the path to the nearest town. The traveler, who asked for their help, stands nearby, watching them work. He thanks them a ton for the help they're giving him. At one point, Stark gets tired and asks Frieren why they can't just use magic to move the guy's caravan past the landslide. Frieren explains that if they do that, other travelers could get stuck like this guy. Stark gets it and stays quiet until they're halfway done clearing the rocks. They then ask the traveler why landslides happen in that area, and the old man says it's due to constant wars with demons. Stark nods and ends up playfully bantering with Fern, who keeps calling him Mr. Stark. After they get past their little spat, they finish clearing the rocks and follow the old man to his town to chill for a few days. On the way, the old man is amazed to learn Frieren is an elf, since he's never seen one. Frieren then explains how elves feel indifferent about reproduction and prefer solitude. When they get to the town's gates, the vibe is busier than usual. The old man tells them the town is gearing up for the Liberation Festival, celebrating the day Himmel and his crew defeated the Demon King. Frieren doesn't want to reveal she's an elf, so she keeps asking odd questions about the festival. Eventually, she remembers a time when Himmel was acting like a jerk, giving silly reasons for his obsession with having statues made in their honor. Back then, Frieren didn't care about those statues, but Himmel wanted them up so she wouldn't feel lonely once they were all gone. That night, Frieren and her crew check out the statues the town decorated in their honor. After chatting about traditions and such, they hit the hay and leave town the next day. Before they get too far, Stark asks Frieren where they're headed, and she replies, "Heaven." This makes him go quiet. A few weeks later, the trio arrives in Graf Granat's territory, also in the northern lands. At first, Frieren thinks the town seems normal, until she detects something weird demon magic. Out of nowhere, she readies her staff and points it toward the source of the magic. Suddenly, 3 demons appear at the gate up ahead with Graf Granat, and Frieren gears up to take one out. Luckily, the guards manage to stop her just in time. Soon, the Graf and a supposed demon peace envoy, Lord Lugner, get closer to check out this imposter's strength. Lugner asks Graf to confirm he didn't send the assassin after him. Granat reassures him that Frieren is acting solo. Lugner believes Graf and gets ready to size up his new enemy. After a bit of tense talk with the mage, Graf has the guards toss Frieren into the dungeon for the time being. Hours later, Stark and Fern check in on their master down in the dungeon. They tell her she's been hit with a 2-year jail sentence, and Frieren just brushes it off like it's no big deal. When they get to the main topic, Fern asks Frieren if she knows about Aura, the guillotine. Frieren explains that the demon is one of the 7 sages of destruction who served the Demon King. Fern continues, saying that the demon has been battling the town for ages since regaining her lost powers, and has never faced anyone strong enough to take her down. After all these endless fights, they're finally here to discuss a peace treaty. Frieren scoffs at the obvious plan the demon has to undermine the town from within, but when Stark doesn't buy the demon's innocent act, Frieren decides to give him the lowdown on how dangerous they really are. She recounts her last run-in with demons about 80 years ago when she was with Himmel and the gang. One night, the whole village turned against a demon kid for eating one of their own daughters. When it came time to kill the demon, Himmel hesitated because the kid looked cute. Bored with the drama, Frieren stepped up to eliminate the little punk, but the village chief had mercy on the demon boy, thinking he could somehow redeem him. That decision blew up in his face years later when the demon boy turned on him and killed him to replace the daughter he had eaten with the chief's own daughter. The next time Himmel and the others found out, they didn't hesitate to finish off the demon. Even in its final moments, the demon tried to mess with the humans' minds, and Frieren asked why. The demon said it was because humans taught them words to deceive. After finishing her story, Frieren lays out the harsh reality for her team and pushes them to keep investigating. The following day, Lugner and his 2 sidekicks hang out, waiting for Graf Granat to show up for their meeting. While they wait, they discuss that strange mage who popped up in town yesterday. Lugner thinks he recognizes her but can't quite place where he's seen her. Meanwhile, Frieren senses the town's destruction on the horizon and plans to escape from prison when the chaos kicks off. Finally, when Graf shows up, he takes the demons to his late son's room and shows them the sword his son wielded proudly before he was killed in the battle against Aura 10 years ago. After sharing a few more details about his son, Graf flips on Lugner and threatens to kill him. Lugner scans the room and plays the father card on Graf, telling him his own dad was also killed in that battle, which is why he's there to negotiate peace. After hearing Lugner's plea, Graf changes his mind and takes them to the meeting room. On their way, Liney, one of Graf's subordinates, asks him what a father is, and Lugner admits he doesn't know. At the balcony, he tells her to stand by until they get to Graf and convince him to lower the town's defenses so Lady Aura can feed on the humans. When he checks on the other subordinate, Drott, Liney mentions that the idiot went to deal with an obstacle. At that moment, Drott shows up in the dungeons, takes out the guard on duty, and finds himself at Frieren's cell. He thinks Frieren is an easy target he can take down. Frieren gives him a heads up that she's stronger than he thinks, but as expected, the fool doesn't listen. Before showing off his hidden magic wires, Drott asks Frieren who she thinks she is. Frieren replies that she's tougher than Aura the guillotine herself, and Drott just laughs, thinking she's bluffing. When push comes to shove, Drott reveals his deadly magic wires wrapped around Frieren's neck, lifting her up in the air. Frieren, already prepared for this move, gathers mana around her neck to stop the wires from cutting through. Drott gives her props for being quick on her feet and keeping her cool, since most mages would have panicked. Then, he tightens the wires, aiming to slice through Frieren's mana and her head at the same time. Frieren rolls her eyes at his cocky expression, thinking he can take her down so easily, but before he can even finish his thought, she's already sliced off one of his arms. In a flash, her hands are around his neck. He tries to play it off by begging for mercy, but Frieren finishes him off before he can even get the words out. After taking out one of the demons, Frieren feels she should let Graf know what happened so he's aware of the other two. Unfortunately, when she makes it outside the dungeon gates, she finds a guard's headless body waiting for her and sneaks past before anyone notices she's gone. Meanwhile, Fern and Stark are chilling over a big lunch at a random joint in town. Once they're done eating, Fern gets up and tells Stark it's time to hit the palace and asks Graf to free Frieren. If they can get her out fast, they'll have a shot at taking down those annoying demons before they wipe out the town. But before they can move, Stark takes a moment to recognize the strength of the demon named Lugner. He knows that Jerk is strong and cocky, having ignored both him and Fern when they first met. Stark gets so freaked out that his hands start shaking, spilling his drink. As he cleans up, he warns Fern to watch out for those demons, since they're probably with Graf right now. Fern doesn't see a problem with that, so she urges Stark to hurry up so they can get there quickly. Right after Drott bites the dust, Liney and Lugner notice his mana vanishing. Instead of being upset, they pause to wonder who that super powerful mage is. Lugner realizes he's seen her before, but can't remember where. Before they can figure it out, Graf and his crew burst into the room, accusing them of sending Drott behind their backs to attack their guard. Lugner tries to deny it, but all signs point to Drott, who's conveniently not there to defend himself. Graf knows Frieren is a strong mage and wouldn't dare attack a guard. With nothing left to lose, Graf has his men surround Lugner and Liney. Soon enough, they have their swords drawn, and Graf asks Lugner one last time to bring out his guy to clear things up. Fed up with the interrogation, Lugner decides to take matters into his own hands. Without a second thought, he cuts himself and uses his magic to turn his blood into a long, flexible, sharp blade, which he uses to take down all the soldiers except Graf. After dispatching the pesky soldiers, he turns to Graf and fights him for a minute before stopping to explain what words really mean to demons. He then riles up the grieving father by trashing his son's memory, before stabbing himself with the same sword Graf is holding and jabbing him with the magic blood blade. With Graf wounded, Lugner takes control of the castle. He stops the fight right there and locks Graf up until he spills how to break the barrier protecting the town. That evening, Fern and Stark spot Frieren walking through the town square with her cloak pulled over her head. They recognize her right away and follow her to a secluded spot to chat. Frieren fills them in on everything that went down in the cell, including the guard Drott took out, and asks what they think about it. Fern responds with logic and pleads with Frieren not to leave them behind in the town. Frieren smiles, telling them not to sweat the two losers, they're not as tough as they think. With that, she turns away from her friends and sets off to tackle her next mission. Before she gets too far, Stark drops to his knees, begging to stay behind, but Fern, embarrassed by his antics, drags him back into town. Not long after, Frieren uses her magic detection skills to scan the entire country for big mana reserves. Eventually, she picks up on one about 10 kilometers away and realizes that Aura the Guillotine, one of the 7 mages of destruction, is hiding her army in plain sight. Frieren smiles at the thought of battling a strong opponent and hopes Aura is worth her time. That night, Stark and Fern creep into the mansion under the cover of darkness to find Graf and take out the peace envoys. They explore a few dimly lit rooms after sneaking into the inner chambers and slip in through an open window quietly. Meanwhile, on one of the upper floors, they spot Lugner with Liney and a wounded Graf tied to a chair. Before torturing Graf, Lugner explains what magic is and how demons came together to craft spells that surpass human logic. He mentions genius mages like Flam, the legendary mage, and curses her for making barriers like the one that has protected the town for ages. If it weren't for her, they would have taken over this town long ago. Now that he's got Graf in his grasp, Lugner demands Granat teach him how to break the barrier, keeping the town safe. He gives Granat one last shot to reveal where the grimoire is, but Granat stays silent. Frustrated, Lugner leaves him to stew over his next move and goes off with Liney to continue searching for the grimoire. Once he's gone, Stark sneaks into the room to rescue Granat. Just as he's about to untie him, Stark starts trembling, and Granat notices. They have a quick chat before Stark steadies himself and desperately tries to cut through the tough rope. Granat soon loses hope and tells Stark to take his necklace to show the guard so they can start evacuating the citizens. Stark stands up, pulls out his axe, and prepares to break the fancy chair to save Granat. Just then, Lugner and Liney walk in and find Stark shaking in front of them. Granat denies knowing Stark, and Lugner offers him a chance to bolt before it's too late. Stark, offended by Lugner's underestimation, charges at him. Lugner welcomes the challenge and quickly injures Stark's arms. After pinning Stark down, Lugner calls him a fool for going solo. At this moment, Stark calls for Fern, and she shows up with a surprise attack that leaves a hole in Lugner's chest. Stunned by Fern's mastery over her mana, Lugner can't comprehend what just happened. He asks Fern about the spell she used, and she tells him it's just Zoltrak. Lugner gets ticked off and tells her to stop messing around. He fires more questions at her to figure out how she learned such a spell, but Fern ignores him. Before round 2 kicks off, Fern and Stark get Granite out of there into safety. After they leave, Lugner tells Liney that he'll have blood on his hands because of those two, so they can't lose track of them. Next, he discusses the new spell with Liney and remembers which which mage used a similar spell on him ages ago, Frieren. In that moment, Lugner finally realizes who the mysterious mage is. He calls Frieren the slayer of demons and a genius he despises. Meanwhile, Frieren catches up to Aura to halt her army. Stark and Fern take Granat to a local church to get him fixed up. Once the doctor finishes treating him, Granat tries to get up and chat with his rescuers. He thanks them for saving his skin and promises to forgive their mage buddy for rescuing them from the demon's trickery. Fern tells him that Frieren didn't kill the guard, and Granat admits he knows that. More importantly, when he hears the mage's name is Frieren, he feels dumb for disrespecting her and tossing her in the dungeon in the first place. Granat goes on to explain that it was Frieren and the heroes from his grandfather's time who chased Aura and the Demon King away from their village, giving them at least 60 years of peace and prosperity. Now that Aura's way stronger than before, it's anyone's guess what could happen to those who stand up to her. At the same time, Frieren reintroduces herself to Aura, her old frenemy, and politely asks her to crawl back into whatever hole she came from and leave the town alone. Of course, Aura isn't about to back down without a fight, so she sends a few of her undead soldiers to take on Frieren. Frieren easily defends herself against the soldiers, and soon finds herself surrounded by Aura's puppets. After a quick chat with her old buddy, Frieren recognizes some of the armor on Aura's puppets, and decides it's time to end Aura for good. In response, Aura reveals her secret weapon, the Scales of Obedience. Back at the church, Granat explains what this special weapon is all about. The Scales of Obedience activate when Aura places her soul and that of her enemy on either side of the scale, and waits for it to tip in favor of the soul with the most mana. The one with less mana will have to obey her for all eternity. This weapon is super risky, but Aura, who's lived for 500 years, has one of the biggest mana reserves ever, so she's never lost a bet not once. Granat warns the adventurers never to underestimate the magic of the 7 Sages of Destruction. After all that, Fern asks if there's a way to counter it. Granat tells her that while the scales judge fairly, nobody has had as much mana as Aura in 500 years since she became a sage. Fern asks if there's a way to fight it, and Granat says there is. Turns out, if a soldier with a strong will gets caught in the trap, they can resist the obedience spell for a bit before they get fully controlled. During that time, Aura would find it hard to keep them in check. If she manages to control them, she'll get rid of them after she takes charge. Around this time, Frieren is getting overwhelmed by all the undead soldiers, so she uses a bunch of her mana to break the magic controlling them. This catches Aura off guard, and she asks why Frieren didn't use flashy magic to wipe them out like she did 80 years ago. Frieren says it's because Himmel scolded her. Aura says she's free to do whatever now that Himmel is gone, and Frieren takes that to heart. She stands up and decides to take down the demons mercilessly while she's at it. Stark gets ready after making sure Graf is safe, so he can head out and track down the demons. Fern warns him not to get too cocky, since those demons can pack a punch, but Stark insists someone has to put a stop to them, so he's off to do the Lord's work. Inspired, Fern decides to tag along, but Stark tells her to help get the townsfolk out while he looks for Frieren, and begs her to come help defeat the demons for them. They agree on the plan and get moving. Before they part ways, Fern notices Stark's bloodied arms and makes a fuss about it. Stark playfully points out the bloodstain on her robe and asks about it. Fern quickly spots the mana in the blood and tosses her robe aside. Just as she's about to take off Stark's robe, Lugner and Liney sneak up on them, while Liney conjures an axe and slams Stark down. Stark quickly gets back up and realizes Liney's technique is from Eisen. Meanwhile, Lugner talks for a few seconds before getting to the point. Fern allows him to ask her a few questions to buy some time. Lugner underestimates her and asks about Stark's strength. Fern tells him Stark is Eisen's best student, but Lugner just rolls his eyes. Then he asks where Frieren is, and Fern tells him Frieren fled town after killing a guard. Before asking anything else, Lugner steps away to think. He figures Frieren must have left to hunt down and eliminate Aura. In that small opening, Fern grabs her staff, breaks free from Lugner's grip, and gets close enough to threaten him. After blabbing about why he's such a proud jerk, Fern warns Lugner she'll blast a hole in his chest. Lugner dares her to try and says he'll have her head flying off before she even gets close. Before anything happens, Fern remembers the time she asked Frieren about her magic strength. It was a regular day, and they had just taken out a herd of demon horses. She recalls Frieren mentioning her speed in casting spells, which is why she usually makes Fern do most of the demon slaying. Moments before the fight starts, there's a tense silence between them. Then, in an instant, Lugner and Fern both attack and defend at lightning speed. From the clash, Fern spots Lugner's weak spot, his heart. With that in mind, they gear up for battle. Meanwhile, Liney stands over Stark's unconscious body, thinking she's won. Just then, Stark gets back up and tells her not to celebrate yet, because he's still ready to fight. Meanwhile, Lugner and Fern are still going at it hard. After putting up with all of Fern's attacks, Lugner finally admits she's got some serious skills, and gets mad at Frieren for teaching her how to be a pro mage. To try and take her down, he figures he'll just bombard her until she runs out of mana. What he doesn't realize is that Fern has way more mana left than he thinks. As as the minutes roll on, he keeps taking her hits until he's forced to call for help from Liney. Over on the other side, Liney stays aggressive while Stark defends against her strikes. When they hit a stalemate, Stark asks her how she's so good at copying other people's moves. Liney gives him a quick rundown and keeps pressing the fight until she pins him down again. Not giving him a moment to catch his breath, she attacks non-stop. Stark ramps up his defense, but eventually, he loses his cool and takes a hit to the shoulder from one of Liney's strikes. Before throwing in the towel, he remembers a lesson from his master, Aizen, who taught him that losing is all in a warrior's mindset, and as long as he stands ready to fight, he hasn't truly lost. Knowing he still has some fight left in him, Stark gets back up and realizes his master's hits felt way lighter. Facing Liney again, he lets her slash him in the belly with her imitation axe. At the same time, Lugner and Fern ramp up their attack range, and Liney cuts right through Stark's wide-open defense. Now that she's fallen into his trap, Stark unleashes a lightning strike to take her out. Lugner catches something off with Liney's mana, and gets distracted for a moment. Fern uses this chance to blast a Zoltrak spell at him, and punches a hole through his chest, taking his heart out with the attack. Before the main story kicks off, we get a flashback showing Frierin's early life with her master Flam, 1,000 years ago when she was saved from certain death by the legendary mage. In this flashback, a young Frierin strolls through the woods with Flam, chatting about the dishonor that comes from tricking demons. Flam reminds her of that jerk Basalt who wrecked her elven village and tells her that demons are all scumbags who don't care about honor, honesty, or fairness. So, why should she, being human, play fair with them? If being called a disgrace to humanity means outsmarting demons and taking them down before they catch on, then she's all in for that title. After taking a fatal hit to the heart, Lugner just sits there, accepting his fate. Before he goes down for good, Fern asks him about Frierin's fight with the so-called Lady Aura. Lugner shrugs it off, confident she'll lose. When Fern presses him on why he thinks that, he claims it's because Lady Aura has way more mana than anyone in the demon army. He totally underestimates Frierin's abilities, and tells Fern she's guaranteed to lose if Aura decides to weigh their souls on the scale of obedience. Fern shoots back, saying her master always comes up with some trick to outsmart Aura and her ridiculous reserves. At this point, something doesn't sit right with Lugner. He can't wrap his head around how Fern keeps hitting him hard despite her weak mana. It suddenly clicks for him, and he figures out the trick behind Fern and Frierin's low mana output. But before he can say a word, Fern finishes him off. The flashback continues, and now it shows the moment Flam first met Frieren. She randomly stumbled upon a devastated elven village, and found out the culprits were demons led by Basalt the Throne, a general from the demon army. As she searches, she finds a teenage elven mage with loads of mana who even managed to defeat the great general, but the battles took a toll on her. Flam gets grossed out by Frierin's blunt approach in combat, but just when she's about to leave the elf to her fate, Frieren speaks up, telling Flam she knows how powerful she is, and to stop hiding. Flam is impressed by her perception, and decides to take her under her wing. She then piggybacks the wounded, indifferent elf out of the burning village after learning her name. On the way to her place, Frieren asks Flam what happened to her village. Flam explains that the elven village is gone, so there's no one to worry about leaving behind. Frieren requests to be put down so she can go her own way, but Flam refuses. Instead, she tells Frieren she's going to be her new student, so she better get used to it. Not long after, Flam senses 3 demon mages on their tail and stops to face them. When the mages show up, they demand Flam hand over the girl and scram. Flam puts Frieren down and teaches her her first lesson. She knows how foolish and cocky the demons get when their magic is questioned. Having dealt with them as a powerful mage, Flam has picked up a clever trick to catch these idiots off guard. Just when they think they've got it all figured out, Flam launches a quick attack that wipes them out in seconds. After that, she turns to Frieren and explains how she pulled it off. Frieren gets it and tells Flam she realized she hides her massive mana by controlling the output, making others think she's weak. Flam nods, acknowledging her response, and takes her back to her home in the woods. A few days later, Flam kicks off Frieren's training after patching up her injuries. On the way to the fields, she chats about her lifestyle with the young elf, who's pretty stoked about it. When they finally reach the fields, Flam has Frieren dial down her mana output to just 1/10 of what she usually puts out. Once she gets that under control, she'll bulk up her mana reserves by a ton while she's at it. As Frieren starts her training, she asks her master how long she plans to do this. Flam grins and tells her they'll need to spend their whole lives tricking demons into underestimating them so they can catch them off guard. Right now, Frieren stands in front of Aura and her army of undead with just a tiny bit of her mana leaking out. Aura kicks off a chat about Lugner and the other 2 losers biting the dust. When it's time to get serious, she challenges Frieren to wager her soul on a scale of obedience to see whose mana is stronger. Frieren takes a moment to size up Aura's huge mana pool, but stops herself from getting too overwhelmed when the ritual starts. Before anything goes down, we flash back to Frieren in another town with her master, gathering supplies. Along the way, she asks Flam why demons can't hide their mana like they do. Flam explains that demons are all about individualism and only care about their own achievements, not rules or order. To help Frieren get it, Flam breaks down the intense love-hate humans have for wealth and power, and tells her demons view mana the same way. Sure, they sometimes suppress their mana for stealth, but none are dumb enough to do it all the time, since that would blow their cover and mess with their status. After breaking all this down, Flam reminds Frieren how lucky she is to be an elf instead of a demon. Even after 3 years of constantly keeping her mana in check, she's still nailing it without breaking a sweat. Frieren credits it to having an awesome master. Fast forward 50 years in the flashback, Flam's gotten super old and wrinkly. One evening, she finds her apprentice practicing magic, just like always, and asks if she still loves magic the way she did back in the day. Frieren says yes, and Flam warns her never to make herself known in history so she can stay in the background until she finally takes down the Demon King. With that, she asks Frieren to plant flowers around her grave when she passes, and Frieren learns a flower spell right there. A few more years go by, and Flam eventually passes away, and Frieren honors her last wish. After laying her master to rest, Frieren moves on with her life, living like a regular side character, training whenever she can, and soaking up all the knowledge she can. Hundreds of years later, Himmel, Eisen, and the dopey Hyder finally meet her for the first time. Their introduction is a weird one since Frieren tries to shoo them away, but after a ton of persuasion from the hero himself, she finally agrees to join them on their date with the Demon King. The rest is history. Back in the present, Aura weighs her soul against Frieren's, grinning from ear to ear, thinking she's got Frieren beat. Frieren spots the smug look on Aura's face and asks why she's smiling so hard. Aura brushes her off and starts trash-talking Frieren's super low mana reserves. When the souls hit the scale, and Aura's soul tips the balance, she gets overly confident and steps closer to Frieren, sword in hand, ready to chop her head off. Just then, the scales start to tilt in Frieren's favor, and she tells Aura she's seriously misjudged the situation. See, after nearly 1,000 years of training, keeping her mana suppressed has become second nature, so there's no way a 500-year-old demon would see through her act. Eventually, Frieren unleashes her massive mana reserves, making Aura realize just how foolish she's been for thinking she could outdo her. Once the scales tip in Frieren's favor, she turns her back to head home after ordering Aura to kill herself. Unable to defy Frieren's command, Aura does the unthinkable and ends her own life, left wondering where it all went south. By morning, Fern shows up at Aura's last battlefield and sees her master paying respects to the fallen soldiers who have finally been freed from Aura's zombie grip. Noticing the grim scene, Fern calmly walks over to her master and asks if she's finally taken down Aura, to which Frieren replies yes. Shortly after, Graf and Stark arrive, and Frieren attempts to make a run for it. Luckily, Graf has already pardoned her, so Frieren remains free. As the guys approach the zombie soldier's armor, the man thanks Frieren for honoring the fallen. A bit later, Graf checks out the armor of the dead soldiers while Frieren and her pals reminisce about the good old days with Himmel, who used to give her a hard time for using flashy spells. After chatting about her past enough, she praises both Fern and Stark for handling Lugner and his buddy, Liney, without her help. Stark and Fern try to play it off, but things take a turn when Granat and his crew discover the armor of his long-dead son, with the Granat family crest necklace still resting on the shoulders. Granat pays his last respects to his son and heads back to his town. Days later, Granat finally meets with Frieren and her crew to discuss their reward. While Granat has been busy doing great things for them, he just can't wrap his head around why Frieren would only ask for the grimoire about their defensive barriers and more. Frieren explains that she's been into collecting spells and grimoires from all over the world, so there you go. Granat then tells her to chill with the formalities because he knows she sees him as a kid compared to how long she's lived. But Frieren opts to keep it formal due to her past experience when Hyder and Himmel were almost executed just for being casual with the Graf. At this point, Stark is already fidgeting, and it doesn't help when the lumberjack shows up with an axe in hand. Mistaking him for the executioner, Stark collapses right on his knees and gets floated out of Granat's room after the meeting. Next up, Frieren and Fern catch everyone's attention as they stroll through the town square with a knocked-out Stark floating midair. At first, people think they're a bit odd, but soon they realize the heroes passing by deserve their respect. Over the next 6 months or so, Frieren and her crew kick back in the town and meet more people every day. At one point during their stay, they witness the final burial of the fallen soldiers from Aura's army, including Graf Granat's son. Once their 6-month stay wraps up, Frieren and her friends stock up on supplies and get ready to hit the road to heaven. On that day, Graf walks them to the gates, cautioning them to watch out for the harsh northern plateau since travel is restricted and only first-class mages are allowed to pass through certain areas. Frieren gets confused about what a first-class mage is and asks Fern for the lowdown. Fern pulls out her certification, showing she's a third-class mage. Frieren rolls her eyes at that nonsense and asks Graf if there's a city up north where they can get her certified. Graf tells her they can get it in Oberst, the largest city up north from theirs. After explaining how to get to the big city, Graf thanks Frieren and her crew one last time before they head off on their journey. Less than a day later, it starts snowing and Frieren gets all messed up from it. When Fern asks her about the winters in the north, Frieren tells her it's nothing but bad news. Turns out she was spot on because the blizzards just keep getting worse day by day. Before they even hit the Schwer Mountains, they're already lost and shaking like leaves from the freezing cold. Stark's the first to go down from hypothermia, and Fern tries to revive him, but he's way gone, Unable to use magic to carry him, Fern decides to haul his lazy butt and drag him to the nearest shelter up the road. Predictably, that annoying jerk gives Fern the creeps the whole way, since she smells way better than he has in years. After an hour of trekking, they finally hit the shed Frieren mentioned. Fern senses someone inside and suggests they head back, but Frieren ignores the crying kid and just opens the door to find a swole elf dude doing squats to warm up from the harsh winter chill. Fern, who's never seen a guy with a six-pack before, initially thinks he's a total creep, so she yanks Frieren back and suggests they find another place. Just then, the guy opens the door and scowls at Fern for calling him a pervert. When he sees Frieren as an elf, he invites them in and has them start a fire in his fireplace. Once they warm up and get past the small talk, the swole elf introduces himself as Kraft the monk. After learning Frieren and Fern's names, they chat about where they're headed. When Kraft hears they're going to heaven, he praises them for being holy. Frieren tries to downplay it, but then Stark's body gets even colder to the touch. As they worry about the poor guy, it turns out he's just deep in thought about his favorite dessert. When he finally wakes up, he finds himself all bundled up in Kraft's arms and freaks out, shaking everyone else awake. Turns out Kraft was just sharing some body heat to help the kid out. When Stark snaps back, he checks out Kraft's nice body and asks him about his workout routine. After learning the monk's name, Stark asks him to train him. But before diving into that, Kraft has the girls follow him outside to dig out some supplies from his food cart buried in the snow. On their way back to the shed, Kraft asks Frieren if she knows anything about him, but when Frieren says no, he just gives her the same line. Fern tries to let him know she was the one who took down the Demon King with a party of heroes, but Kraft didn't even know demons were a thing. When they get back to the shed, they just chill there for the next 6 months until winter is over. During that time, Stark trains with Kraft as much as possible to gear up for whatever comes next. Once it's time to head out, Kraft gives Frieren a carved necklace and talks about this goddess everyone seems to worship. Frieren makes it clear she's not pious at all, but Kraft hopes for everyone's sake that the goddess is real. If not, his life would be meaningless. He tells Frieren to share her life story so he can praise her, since she doesn't believe in any goddess. At this point, Frieren recalls a memory from 80 years ago with Hyder the priest, when the tipsy guy brought up the same topic. Back then, Hyder was the only one in her circle who knew she'd been pushing down her mana the whole time. He found her intriguing and wanted to learn more. Frieren brushes herself off, telling him she's nothing special and has lived like a zombie. Hyder chuckles and tells her to tell her life story since he might have a mage kid soon. Remembering that moment, Frieren realizes she doesn't need to retell her life story since she already did it before. Kraft asks about the weirdo who asked her the same thing, and she tells him that guy's in heaven now. Soon, they all get their stuff together, and Kraft heads off. Fern and Stark do their best to say goodbye, knowing they'll never see that nice monk again in their lifetimes. Weeks later, Frieren and her friends are trekking through heavy snow to reach the next town a few miles ahead. Midway into their trip, Frieren dozes off and almost hits her head on the ground, but Fern catches her just in time. A moment later, both Fern and Stark are stressing about what to do with Frieren, since she just collapsed. Stark initially offers to carry her, but after reading his expression, Fern decides he doesn't have the best intentions and opts to carry the poor elf herself while continuing the trek. As she sleeps, Frieren drifts into dreamland, where she has a dream about a stingy jerk of a king who shortchanged them for the huge monster-slaying job she and her old hero gang did ages ago. On their way to their next stop, Himmel shows off his hero sword, and Frieren asks if it's the real deal. When Hyder says no, Himmel explains that a blacksmith gave it to him after he saved him when he was younger. Frieren then asks if that's why he became a hero, and Himmel clarifies that wasn't the case. The real reason he became a hero was to win a bet he made against Hyder back in the orphanage. Now that he's the real deal, the punk who challenged him back then is just a drunk priest, which really shows how ironic life is. Everyone laughs and has a good time. Meanwhile, Frieren stands there watching her buddies stroll into the sunset as she slips back into reality. Frieren wakes up, still thinking about the dream, and soon gets swept away by the harsh weather around them. She tells Fern and Stark to keep pushing ahead until they reach the village and sticks to Fern's back because she smells nice. At that point, Stark asks Fern if he can carry their master, but Fern still doesn't trust him at all. Eventually, they start moving again and stop when they hit the outskirts of the next northern town. There, Frieren hops off Fern's back and is welcomed by the young village chief, who greets her to the village of the sword. Frieren compliments the chief on how young and impressive she is, and asks about the destruction just outside the village. The chief explains that it's the work of the Lord of the Mountain. Around that time, Stark starts talking. Fern asks him if he's heard of this mountain before, and Stark says yes. According to the legends, this village is said to hold the hero's sword, which is believed to be placed in a sanctuary nearby. The legend states that whoever can pull the sword from the stone is a true hero. Over the years, countless mages and heroes have tried to pull it out, but none succeeded. That is, until 80 years ago when Himmel finally pulled it out. A few moments later, the village chief arrives at their cabin and makes them feel at home. As they warm up by the fire, the chief scolds Frieren for being late and for not completing her duty. Fern looks confused and asks Frieren what duty she she's talking about. Frieren then explains she's referring to monster extermination and assures Fern that she'll get started on that the next day. The next day, Stark, Fern, and Frieren head up the mountains to take out some monster wolves before checking out a sketchy-looking cave. Stark finds a bunch of wolves and wipes them out, just hanging around for the chaos to kick in. Frieren tries to signal the guy to get out, but it's too late. The Mountain Lord shows up, a massive demon wolf. Frieren faces off with it, getting Stark to cut off one of its arms, while Fern throws up some magic shields for her protection. After letting her friends do the heavy lifting, she blasts the demon wolf to bits with Zoltrak. Right after that, Stark's left scratching his head because he doesn't understand why the hero sword is still stuck in stone when the legends always say Himmel took it. At first, Frieren tells some nonsense about demons being drawn to the sword and wanting to destroy it, but when Stark tells her to cut the crap, she admits Himmel actually messed up and couldn't pull it out. Turns out, he wasn't bummed about it either. Instead, he used it as motivation to show everyone that anyone can be a hero if they put in the effort. Fast forward 80 years, and Himmel proves his worth, becoming a better hero than anyone else out there. Fern asks Frieren why they made up that cover story. That's when Frieren shares why she loves working behind the scenes. She hates how future generations glamorize heroes, making everyone else feel small when they don't measure up. After chatting a bit more, Frieren and the other two ladies take off, leaving Stark sitting in the snow, lost in thought. With their work in the village wrapped up, Frieren and her crew hit the road for the Appetit region up north. They roll into town around New Year's and kick back at a nice inn. Soon after, Frieren dives into reading grimoires while Fern gets ready to go shopping. She asks her master to tag along, but Frieren prefers to stay inside. Before Fern leaves, Frieren reminds her it's Stark's birthday, so she should pick him up something nice. When Fern asks what Frieren plans on getting Stark, Frieren pulls out a potion that melts clothes and says guys love that stuff. Fern snatches the potion from her and pours it on her head, watching her clothes dissolve and leaving her totally naked before heading out. Frieren covers herself and starts brainstorming a solid gift for Stark. Just then, she trips over something and decides to use it. Fern is on a mission to find Stark, searching everywhere until she spots him, counting cloud shapes that look like boobs on the edge of town. When she tries to talk to him, the dude's nonsense makes her back off. But after a bit, she gathers the guts to approach him and puts a stop to his boob jokes. Stark gets quiet and decides to tag along with Fern as they stroll around town. He starts asking her questions to see if he's been a bad guy. Fern only chimes in when she asks if there's anything he wants. Stark, puzzled, asks her to clarify. That's when Fern reminds him it's his birthday, and she wants to give him a present. Stark gets even more confused, asking if that's a birthday thing, since he's never gotten a gift from his dead family or master before. Fern is taken aback, thinking he might be messing with her, but it looks like he's being real. Stark then shares a wild backstory from when he was a kid. He grew up in a warrior village, but always lived in his brother's shadow. His bro, Stoltz, was a nice, strong warrior, while their dad was a jerk who didn't care for Stark, who was the weaker sibling. Still, Stoltz never held that against him, and often trained with the little confused redhead. Everything was cool until demons showed up and wrecked their village. Stark was the only one to get away clean because Stoltz sacrificed his life to save him. Hearing all this, Fern feels a mix of pride and sadness for the goofy dude, impressed by his brother's bravery. To make it up to him, she takes him to a gift shop and picks out something cheap he can treasure forever. Later that night, they get home to Frieren, whipping up big hamburger steaks for them all. Stark remembers his master doing the same thing, and Frieren tells him that it was just a tradition in their village to celebrate birthdays like that. After reflecting on those memories, Stark finally sees how much love he's received from both his brother and master over the years. As he recalls his last moment with Stoltz, he gets emotional when he takes his first bite of the hamburger steak. Ultimately, the girls join in the fun at the table, and they all have a great time that night. A few weeks later, Frieren and her crew roll into their next town and bump into a weird dude in the Alt Woods. He totally digs the adventurer life, wanting to be like Frieren and her squad, but lacks the guts to actually hit the road and go adventuring. Before they can do anything else, he spills his childhood story about how he almost teamed up with a buddy back in the day to travel the world and become an adventurer. After listening to his rambling, Frieren asks him why he's dishing out such nonsense. The guy says it's because he's stuck in a never-ending swamp while gathering firewood. He begs Frieren to rescue him from the mud that's about to swallow him up, but she hesitates since she doesn't want to get her hands dirty. Luckily, before he can sink too deep, Fern shows up and pulls him out of the mud. After that, they help the messy dude to the edge of his village, and he invites them to join his harvest festival to thank them for the help. But Frieren says they gotta hustle to a bigger town for supplies, so they'll catch him later. The dude bids them goodbye, but not too far down the road, Stark gets bitten by a nasty snake. He quickly realizes he's bleeding from his nose and asks the girls for help. Frieren and Fern sit him down and try different healing spells before deciding to fly him to the nearby village church for better treatment. apartment. They argue about it for a bit, but eventually, they zip the bleeding Stark over to the church. Once there, the priest checks him out and tells them it's too late to help him. Stark freaks out, but then the swamp guy from before pops back up to chat about random stuff. After yapping for a minute, he spots Stark, recognizes him, and heals him like it's no big deal. Not long after, he bails for the plaza. Once he's gone, Frieren talks to the priest about how brilliant his brother is, saying it's wild how the disgruntled guy fixed an incurable illness in a snap. The priest tells Frieren about Hyder's visit to the province, mentioning that the only thing Hyder is proud of is his priestly badge. But in terms of real talent, Sign, his brother, and that swamp guy totally outshine him. Ever since they lost their parents as kids, the priest has worried about his younger brother. Over time, he found out that Sane's dream is to become an adventurer and not just another boring village priest like him. Now that they're older, the priest feels bad for his brother as he's gotten used to the dull routine of priest life. His first request to Frieren and the gang is to help him get Sign out of the village so he can experience life again. Frieren and her crew got home that night arguing about whether to add another member to their gang. Fern and Stark thought it'd be cool to have a priest join them, but Frieren wasn't having any of it. Three's a crowd for her. Stark ignored her and headed down to the pub to check on Sign. When he got there, he found Sign acting like a total loser, drinking, smoking, and gambling with a bunch of shady characters. Stark was grossed out at first, but after some small talk, Sign invited him to join the gambling table. About an hour later, Fern could hear Stark yelling his head off. She woke Frieren up and rushed to find out what was going on. When they got there, they saw Stark and Sign nearly naked, just in their underwear. That's when Frieren realized Sign was a sore loser, so she talked some sense into him, shared a few of her own memories, and asked him to join their adventuring team, suggesting it'd be better than living out his pathetic life. Even after all that, Sign still turned them down. By then, Frieren was pretty fed up with the guy's cockiness, so she promised to get him on their team whether he wanted to or not. Just then, Fern showed up with all of Stark and Sign's stuff that she snagged back from the winner for free. She handed over their dirty clothes like she was dealing with a couple of little kids. After settling the gambling mess, Fern and the group talked about their new findings. Fern was kind of okay with Sign's drinking, but Frieren was more determined to get him on their team than ever. Over the next couple of days, Frieren kept trying to convince Sign to join them, but after all their efforts, he still didn't budge. They eventually talked to Sign's brother to figure out what Sign was into. His brother spilled that Sign loved gambling, booze, tobacco, and surprise older women, but they didn't have any older women to charm him into coming along. Just then, Sign popped up to ask his brother something, but when he saw Frieren and her crew again, he froze and bounced. Stark followed him outside and asked if he'd be down for traveling with an older woman. Sign said he was always down for anything wild. That's part of why he wanted to be an adventurer. When he asked Stark to show him where this older woman was, Frieren jumped in and let him know she was the one Stark was talking about. At that point, Sign looked super disappointed. Frieren tried to win him back by blowing him a kiss, but a kiss from someone as small as her made it awkward for Sign. The vibe got really weird after that, and Frieren wondered what went wrong. Eventually, Sign told them to cut the nonsense and give up on trying to drag him along. He then told his brother there was a good chance his friend was already dead. Frieren went back to trying to convince him again, asking why he couldn't follow them. Sign explained how he'd seen a meeting between his brother and Hyder when Hyder was alive. Hyder wanted to recruit his brother to go to the capital, but he chose to stick around and look out for Sign. Though Hyder admired his loyalty, he was still bummed he couldn't get him to the capital. After hearing everything Sign said, his older brother stepped up and slapped him hard. He made it clear he never felt bad about staying behind and would rather die than watch his brother mess up his life. Late that evening, Sign apologized to Frieren for his brother and worked things out with her, laying out his terms before heading out of town. As they took their first steps out, Sign asked where they were headed, and Frieren said heaven. He muttered some words and soon realized just how rude Fern was. After traveling for a few more days, they finally arrive in the Rod region up north. As they wander the town streets, Frieren remembers the last time she was there with Himmel and the crew, 80 years ago. She notices the town hasn't changed much. It still has cute shops and great infrastructure. When they get to the inn, Stark gets into a huge fight with Fern and storms out to cool down after letting her have it. Sign sees the whole drama unfold but can't stop Stark from leaving. He just sits inside and asks Frieren to fill him in on what happened. Turns out, it was Fern's birthday, and Stark didn't get her a gift, so she flipped out and acted all spoiled. This time, Frieren doesn't back Fern up, and Sign tries to explain that guys usually don't care about birthdays and anniversaries like girls do. Eventually, he tells her to chase after Stark and apologize. Frieren backs him up, so Fern starts searching for him. Eventually, she finds the poor guy sulking by the fountain in the plaza, lost in thought about his life choices. Not being able to approach him, Fern leaves and bumps into Sign, who's checking out some gifts to give her. After he makes comments about the gifts, Sign asks if she's found Stark. Fern lets him know that she has, but doesn't know how to talk to him. Sign realizes why she's acting this way and says it's because she hasn't had much practice talking to boys her age. While picking out a gift, Sign tells her not to blame Stark, since he probably doesn't even remember his own birthday. Even though she knows Sign's right, Fern argues that she gave Stark a present on his birthday, so he should do the same. Sign asks if she picked it out for him or if she went shopping with him. When Fern admits she went with him for it, Sign keeps dropping more truth bombs until he convinces her to go talk to Stark. After giving her her birthday gift, he heads back to the inn after Fern apologizes for kicking him. An hour later, Fern finds Stark in the plaza checking out a statue of Himmel the hero. She calls him over, and Stark says he's sorry for not getting her a gift sooner. Honestly, the dude didn't know what she liked, and was too scared to ask her to pick something out because he thought she'd just get annoyed again. Fern tells him not to think like that and apologizes for being harsh. The two lovebirds kiss and make up. After they settle their little argument, Stark takes his new girl to a gift shop to find something nice for her. Meanwhile, Sign spots Frieren watching over Stark and Fern from the rooftop of a random building and calls her out for being sneaky. He then talks about the privilege of young people arguing and bonding before asking Frieren how she got over her teenage angst. When Frieren asks for some context, Sign realizes he's the only adult in their little group. Frieren soon matches his vibe and talks about Hyder's issues and how he annoys her. Sign is kind of shocked hearing all that since the Hyder he knows is a little cooler and calmer. Before saying anything else, Frieren remembers another time with Hyder when he was old and nearing the end. That night, she'd asked him how he became so mature and responsible compared to the gross person he used to be. Hyder goes off on some fancy philosophy about life and even brings up Fern. Frieren asks more questions until she gets up to pat his head as a kind of praise. Just then, she pats Sign's head the same way and calls him a proper adult. Sign thanks Frieren for the gesture, but wishes an older woman would do that for him. A few days later, the four of them hitch a ride through the Bandwoods to get to the next town. After chatting with the driver for a bit, Frieren spots the cute new bracelet on Fern's wrist and asks about it. Fern gets a little shy when she admits it was a gift from Stark. Frieren recognizes the pattern and starts digging through her stuff, looking for the ring Himmel gave her long ago. After tossing her stuff around, she finally finds the ring. An avian monster grabs their carriage and lifts it into the air. Frieren apologizes for dropping her guard and quickly shifts gears to find a way to avoid becoming Monster Chow. She begins by sharing her experience of flying, but Stark interrupts, telling her to get to the point and just share her plan. Eventually, Frieren decides to fly out with the driver while Fern pairs up with Sign for a safer landing. She tells Stark to just jump down, but he's not having any of that for clear reasons, leaving Frieren puzzled. Fern suggests they levitate the whole carriage using magic, and Frieren considers it. Meanwhile, the avian monster dives down to smash the carriage into the ground so it can snack on the remains. Frieren jumps out of the carriage and takes out the demon with a Zoltrak spell. After dispatching the beast, their carriage crashes into the thick forest. Luckily, Frieren manages to slow their descent just before they hit, so while they lose some gear, they're still alive. By nightfall, Sign tends to the horse and joins the others in sulking, especially since they're stranded. Thankfully, they keep their spirits up and spend the next few days gathering wood from the forest to fix the carriage while couch potatoes like Frieren hang out and organize her belongings. At one point, Sign learns about the bracelet Stark gave Fern for her birthday and gives the poor guy props for spending 3 grueling hours looking for the perfect gift. In the end, Stark is thrilled to have found something she appreciates. Moving on, Sign explains the symbolism of the pattern on the bracelet, the inverted lotus, telling Stark it's a gift lovers give each other. Stark freaks out a bit and tries to apologize to Fern, who can hear everything, for rushing things. Fern, being her usual stern self, scolds Stark when he offers to return the gift for something else. After that, the trio heads back to where they crashed and continues fixing the carriage however they can. Hours turn into days as everyone pitches in to keep things going. A few nights later, they finally finish repairing the carriage. Fern finds Frieren searching the woods and learns she's looking for the ring Himmel gave her 80 years ago. She joins her master in the search, but Frieren reassures her not to worry since she's gotten used to losing things by now. Fern tries to explain the meaning behind the patterns on the ring and bracelets, but Frieren brushes it off, saying it doesn't matter. She's ready to lose the ring, considering how accustomed she's become to it. Fern takes her master back to camp to ask for help. Their driver, overhearing this, gives Frieren a scroll with a spell from his hometown that might help find her ring. Frieren thanks him, grabs the scroll, and flies up into the air. After a quick trip down memory lane to the moment Himmel bought the ring for her, Frieren finally tries out the spell. Seconds later, the ring pings its location to her and turns out to be pretty close. Before going for it, Frieren recalls when she received the ring and goes to get it. The next day, Frieren holds the ring close and keeps smiling because now she understands why Himmel gave it to her.